The evening sky was painted in strokes of copper and violet, the kind of light that makes even the roughest land look tender. A lone horse cut a weary path across the plains, hooves muffled by dust, its breath heavy as though it carried not just a rider, but the weight of her silence too. Upon that saddle sat a woman, slender and strong-backed, though her eyes told of years that bent the spirit more than time itself. Her name was Mara. Few spoke it kindly anymore. Around her arm, bound in a strip of faded cloth, was a secret the town had long whispered about. To strangers it was nothing more than linen, dirt-stained from long rides, but to the townsfolk it was a banner of shame. They told stories in hushed tones. Some said she had sinned, others swore she carried disease, and still more believed the cloth was proof of a curse that followed her. But no one truly knew. No one had ever asked her, not with a heart open enough to listen. The cloth was not shame. It was shield, and when she held her hand across it, when her fingers pressed it to her skin, it was not to hide from the world, but to protect the last unbroken piece of herself. The horse carried her into Dry Creek, a town of sun-bleached boards, crooked signs, and voices that carried more gossip than kindness. Lanterns had just begun to glow in windows, and the air smelled of bread cooling on wooden sills and smoke rising from cook fires. Mara dismounted slowly, her boots striking the dirt with the quiet thud of someone who does not wish to disturb. She tied the horse to a post outside the saloon, not for drink, but because every road led past it, and every eye waited there. The moment she stepped onto the boardwalk, heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence. Women's eyes narrowed, men spat into the dust, and laughter shifted into smirks. Mara kept her gaze low, not out of fear but weariness. She had lived long enough to know you cannot change the mind of a mob with mere presence. Still, whispers wrapped around her like smoke. There she is, the cursed one. Don't let her touch you. Hiding something wicked under that rag. Mara passed them all with the grace of a drifting shadow. She carried herself as though she did not hear, but inside, each word settled heavy, like stones placed one after another in the hollow of her chest. It was on this night, when the air carried both the cool of evening and the edge of judgment, that Jed Carter rose from his chair outside the saloon. Jed was a rancher, broad-shouldered, his skin leathered from sun and wind. Women watched him with hopeful eyes, and men slapped his back in easy camaraderie. But what they admired was not depth, it was surface. He had charm, yes, but it was the kind that fed on being seen, not the kind that grew roots in silence. He stepped into Mara's path with a half-smile, one that carried more cruelty than warmth. "Well now," he drawled, "the ghost of Dry Creek returns." Mara paused, her breath steady. "Evening, Jed." He let his eyes linger on the strip of cloth around her arm. "Still hiding that arm of yours? Ain't you tired of carrying secrets?" The crowd behind him chuckled softly. It was not laughter that came from humor, but the brittle kind that feeds on another's discomfort. Mara shifted her weight, her hand instinctively rising to hold the cloth in place. "It's no concern of yours." Jed stepped closer, lowering his voice, though not enough that others could not hear. "Maybe it ought to be. Folks got a right to know what's walking among us. Disease, sin, shame. Who knows what you're hiding?" Her eyes lifted, steady and unshaken. "Please don't take the cloth off." There was no fear in her voice, only a plea layered with years of weariness. The plea of someone who has begged the world for one small mercy and rarely received it. But Jed was not a man who gave mercy. His pride was built on displays of power. And so, with a flourish meant more for the eyes of the crowd than his own satisfaction, he reached forward and ripped the cloth away. For a moment, time stilled. The fabric fell to the ground like a wounded bird, and silence poured heavy over the onlookers. Upon Mara's arm, from shoulder to wrist, ran a scar. Not the thin line of a knife, nor the jagged memory of battle, but a burn, deep, twisting, red turned pale with age. It was the mark of fire, the kind that devours homes and families and leaves behind skin that will never again be smooth. Jed's smirk faltered. His eyes widened, not with pity, but with something else, the shock of truth unmasked, the trembling recognition that he had played a cruel game against something he did not understand. His hand shook. Mara did not cover herself. She stood still, the scar bare to the lantern light, her eyes on the horizon as though daring them all to truly see her at last. The townsfolk, who had leaned forward with hungry curiosity, now recoiled. Some gasped, some muttered prayers, others turned away. For the first time, the cloth had not hidden her. It had protected them from the mirror of their own cruelty. Jed stepped back, his mouth opening but no words finding their way out. His hand dropped uselessly to his side. For a man so eager to expose, he found himself trembling in the presence of what he had revealed. Mara bent slowly, picked up the fallen cloth, and tied it back with quiet dignity. She did not rush, did not falter, only moved with the steady grace of someone who had been here before, broken open, left in the dust, and yet still breathing. When she straightened, her gaze met Jed's. "You wanted to see," she whispered, her voice carrying farther than any shout could. "Now live with what you've done." She walked past him, the crowd parting like reeds before a river. Not one hand reached for her, not one word was spoken. Only the sound of her boots in the dust, fading into the night. And in that silence, Jed Carter, the rancher who had once stood tall, found himself shaking. Not from her scar, but from the weight of his own reflection in it. The days after the cloth was torn were long and heavy. Mara did not speak of it, nor did she allow herself to weep. She had learned long ago that tears were wasted on those who chose not to see. Instead, she carried on with her work, mending fences, tending to her horse, cooking meals in silence, as though the world had not pierced her once more. But something had shifted. The townsfolk, having seen the scar with their own eyes, no longer whispered in curiosity. Now their silence was sharper. They stepped aside in the street, but not from respect. Mothers pulled children closer. Men who once tipped their hats now turned away. It was not fear of her scar. It was fear of what it reminded them. That fire could touch anyone, and survival leaves marks they might not have the strength to bear. Mara felt the distance like winter wind. Cold, constant, cutting. It was on one such day, beneath the noon sun that burned white and merciless, that she found herself at the well outside her small cabin. The rope was stiff, the bucket heavy, and though her body was strong, fatigue clung to her like chains. She pulled once, twice, and the rope groaned as though mocking her. A shadow fell across the well. Without a word, a hand reached out and took hold of the rope. The man who held it was tall, though not broad like Jed. His frame was lean, built not from prideful strut, but from long, steady labor. His hat shaded eyes the color of rain clouds, and his hands bore the calluses of honest work. He drew the bucket up with ease, set it down beside her, and stepped back as though the act meant nothing at all. Mara straightened, cautious. Most men would have spoken, teased her, perhaps, or offered some remark to claim their goodness aloud. But this one did not. He only tipped his hat and murmured, "Ma'am," before turning to leave. "Wait," she said, her voice quiet, uncertain why she had spoken at all. He paused, hand resting on the well's stone edge. "I didn't catch your name." "Elias," he replied simply, then lifted his hat again in parting. His boots crunched against the dust as he walked away, leaving her with water and an ache she could not name. In the days that followed, Elias Graves appeared like the wind, never announced, never demanding, always gone before she could think too hard on his presence. When a storm knocked down part of her fence, she woke to find it mended, the wood still smelling of fresh cuts. When the firewood pile dwindled low, a neat stack would appear at dawn, as though delivered by the earth itself. Her horse, once skittish since the night Jed had torn away the cloth, began to settle again, and she soon learned it was Elias who had been brushing its mane in the evenings, speaking to it in a voice too low for her to hear. At first, Mara resisted. Kindness unsettled her more than cruelty. Cruelty, she understood, it was loud, predictable, sharp. Kindness was quiet, and in its quiet, it demanded trust. She feared that trust more than she feared loneliness. So she tested him, though not aloud. She left tools scattered, chores undone, waiting to see if he would use her need as a tether. But each time he came, he left nothing but the work itself. No note, no word, no claim of debt. Only presence without weight. One evening, as the horizon burned red and the fields whispered with crickets, Mara found herself sitting outside her cabin, the cloth loosened on her arm. The scar caught the fading light, glowing like a river of silver. She did not notice Elias at first, for he moved like dusk, blending quiet soft. He stopped a few paces away, not sitting until she nodded. Even then, he kept distance, as though he knew the air around her was fragile. "You've been helping," she said finally, eyes on the horizon. "A little," he answered. "What?" He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the field. "Fences break. Horses spook. Wood runs out. Figured it don't cost me much to set them right. Don't you want something for it?" His eyes turned to hers then, steady, unflinching. "No." The word startled her more than any declaration might have. For all her life, every hand that reached for her had carried a price. Yet here sat a man who asked for nothing, who seemed to want nothing more than to let her exist without demand. She looked away, tightening the cloth again, though her hand trembled. "People talk, you know. They'll say you're a fool for spending time near me." "Let them talk," Elias said softly. "Their words don't build walls. Don't mend fences either." And with that, he tipped his hat and left, leaving her heart restless in the stillness he carried with him. The week stretched on. Slowly, Mara found her breaths less heavy when she saw his shadow. Slowly, she found herself waiting for the sound of boots on the dirt road. She did not name a hope. Not yet. She called a habit. But deep inside, something tender stirred, a seed of trust breaking the soil after years buried. It was not just Elias who shifted her world. There were others, small voices, quiet presences. Old Clara May, the innkeeper with hands gnarled like tree roots, stopped Mara one morning and pressed a loaf of bread into her arms. "Eat," she said, her tone gruff but eyes warm. "Thin bones don't win battles." Mara nearly wept at the gift, though she did not let tears fall. And Tommy, the boy with hair like straw and knees always scabbed, once ran up to her in the street, his small fingers brushing the edge of her cloth. "Does it hurt?" he asked, eyes wide with nothing but innocence. Mara knelt, lowering her gaze to his. "Not anymore," she whispered. "Good," he said simply, then dashed away, leaving her stunned by the purity of a child's acceptance. Yet despite these sparks of light, the shadow of Jed Carter still lingered. He watched from afar, his pride bruised, his laughter turned sour. Each time Elias lingered near Mara's land, Jed's jaw tightened. And though he said nothing, the weight of his silence carried a promise, one that Mara could feel like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. But in those days before the storm broke, Mara found something she had not dared to believe in. Quiet companionship. Not romance. Not yet. Something deeper. The kind of bond that grows not from longing glances or heated words, but from steady kindness that does not flinch. And in the hush of those evenings, as the wind brushed across the plains and Elias's presence rested near hers like an old hymn, Mara felt the cloth around her arm grow lighter. For the first time in years, she loosened it not because she had to, but because she wanted to breathe. The nights in Dry Creek grew longer as autumn crept across the plains. The wind carried the chill of oncoming frost, rattling through the brittle grass, whispering of endings. The fields smelled of smoke, not from fire, but from the hearts of townsfolk shuddering themselves against the season. Mara's cabin stood on the edge of it all, where the land opened wide and the sky seemed larger than any soul could bear. She had always felt safer on the edges, safer away from the eyes that judged. Yet one evening, when the horizon bled with the last light of day and the first stars trembled into being, she found herself not alone. Elias was there, leaning against the fence he had repaired months before, a lantern in his hand. Its glow flickered across his weathered face, gentle as a prayer. Mara stood at her doorway, cloth still wound tight. She had been watching him in silence for a long while, measuring the stillness he carried. It was not the stillness of stone, but of rivers, quiet, unhurried, yet alive beneath the surface. At last she spoke, her voice as fragile as the breeze. "You should not keep coming here." "I know," he said. "Then why do you?" Elias lifted the lantern, the flame casting its circle of gold upon the dust between them. "Because you're here." The words struck her harder than cruelty ever had. She had been pushed aside, mocked, pitted, feared, but never in all her days had anyone said simply that she was worth being near. She turned away, retreating into the shadows of her cabin. But Elias did not follow. He only stood at the threshold, waiting, his patience stretching as vast as the plains themselves. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke. A single chair by the table, a bed neatly made, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs. It was a space of survival, not comfort. Mara busied her hands with the kettle, though her fingers trembled. "Sit," she whispered, motioning to the chair. Elias obeyed, setting the lantern down so its glow spread across the wooden walls. Mara poured hot water into 2 cups, the steam rising between them like a veil. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the crackle of the small fire filled the room. At last, Mara reached for the cloth around her arm. Her breath caught in her chest. She had never chosen to remove it for another. It had always been torn, mocked, or hidden again in shame. But tonight, her hands moved of their own will, loosening the fabric, letting it fall. The scar gleamed in the lantern light, twisting rivers of pale and dark, skin mapped by fire. She set her cup down with a soft thud, eyes fixed upon the table. "I was 16, she began, her voice low, as though confessing to the night itself. "The fire came in the middle of winter. My father's barn caught first. I woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of my brother screaming." Her breath shuddered. The words had slept inside her for years, but now they woke sharp, cutting on their way out. "I ran in. The roof was caving. My mother pulled at me, begged me not to go, but he was trapped. I broke the beam that pinned him. I dragged him out into the snow. But by then, her voice faltered, tears stinging her eyes. The fire had taken me too." Her fingers brushed the scar, tracing its cruel path. "The doctor said I should be thankful, that I lived. But people don't look at you the same once fire has touched you. They see a curse. They see a mark of God's anger, not survival." Her shoulders shook once, quickly stilled. "So I covered it. Not for me, for them. To make it easier for the world to look at me." The silence that followed was heavy, yet not suffocating. Elias did not rush to fill it. He did not speak empty comfort, nor did he avert his gaze. He simply sat, his eyes steady upon her, as though he were reading the truth in her face and holding it as sacred. At last he said softly, "You carried fire in your flesh, and still you walk among us. That is not weakness, Mara. That is proof of strength most men will never know." Her breath broke, a sob escaping before she could stop it. She covered her face, but Elias did not reach for her. He let her weep as she had not wept in years, the tears burning like the fire once had, cleansing, fierce alive. When the sobs eased, she lowered her hands. Elias was still there, steady as stone, his eyes gentle but unflinching. "Do you believe me cursed?" she whispered. He shook his head. "I believe you endured. And that is a kind of holiness." For the first time since the fire, Mara did not tie the cloth back on. She let her scar breathe in the open air, lantern light painting it with gold. And though her heart trembled, she felt a freedom that was both terrifying and sweet. Outside, the night stretched wide and endless. But somewhere in that darkness, a pair of eyes watched. Jed Carter leaned against the saloon rail, a bottle in his hand, his jaw clenched tight. He had heard the whispers of Elias visiting Mara. He had seen the way she no longer hid herself as tightly. The scar, once her burden, was no longer bending her shoulders. And it stung him. For Jed, Mara's shame had been power. Without it, he felt the hollowness of his own pride. And pride, when wounded, grows sharp. He tipped the bottle back, the whiskey burning down his throat. In his mind, words formed bitter as ash. A woman like her should know her place. And if Elias won't remind her, I will. The bottle struck the rail with a sharp crack. The storm was building. Inside her cabin, Mara sat beside Elias in silence, scar uncovered, heart exposed. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as broken, not as cursed, but as a woman who had walked through fire and still stood. The night whispered through the cracks in the wood. The lantern flame flickered low, and her soul trembled with something she dared not yet call hope. But hope had already taken root. Morning rose over Dry Creek with a restless hush. The sky was pale, almost silver, as if the sun itself hesitated to warm the earth. Folks gathered in the town square for market day, voices mingling with the clatter of wagons and the creak of saddles. Yet beneath the ordinary stir of trade, attention ran quiet and sharp, like a wire pulled too tight. Mara felt it the moment she stepped onto the boardwalk. She carried no basket, no goods to sell, only herself, her scar uncovered, the cloth left behind. The air seemed to shift around her, townsfolk turning, their eyes widening at the sight. Whispers sparked like dry tinder. She's not hiding it anymore. Bold thing, walking out like that. Lord help us. She moved through them with steady steps. Her heart pounded, but she did not falter. After all these years, the weight of hiding had become heavier than the weight of being seen. At the far end of the square stood Jed Carter. His broad frame leaned against the post of the general store, a smirk already tugging at his lips. He had been waiting. Well now, his voice rang loud, cutting through the murmur. If it ain't the scarred lady herself. Finally decided to parade it. The crowd went still. All eyes turned. Mara paused, lifting her gaze to meet his. For once, she did not lower her head. I'm not hiding anymore, she said, voice calm, almost tender. Jed laughed, sharp and bitter. Not hiding? You call that bravery? That's shame painted on your skin for all to see. He stepped forward, each stride heavy with arrogance. You think showing it makes you strong? You think folks will forget what you are? His hand shot out, reaching for her arm as he had once before. The crowd gasped, but before he could touch her, another figure moved. Elias. He stepped between them, calm as stone, his shadow falling across Mara like a shield. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, fixed on Jed with quiet fire. Enough, Elias said. Jed sneered. Stay out of this, Graves. Ain't your fight. Elias shook his head. It became mine the moment you laid hands on her. The two men stood facing each other, the crowd holding its breath. Jed's fists curled, itching for violence. Elias's hands remained open, steady, as though he carried no fear of blows. Mara's voice rose then, soft yet stronger than either man's. This scar is not shame, she said, turning so all could see. The light struck her arm, the mark gleaming like silver fire. It is proof I lived, proof I carried someone out of flames when I could have run. And if you cannot see that, if you can only see ruin, her gaze pierced Jed's, then it is your eyes that are blind, not mine that are broken. The words hung in the air, trembling like the last note of a hymn. Jed's face twisted, pride crumbling. His voice, once booming, faltered. You think they'll believe you? You think anyone will? But the silence of the crowd was answer enough. They were not jeering, not whispering. They were simply watching, many with softened eyes, as if a veil had been torn from their sight. It was not Jed's voice they heard. It was hers. Jed staggered back a step. His hands trembled, his bravado seeping away like water through cracks. He looked at the townsfolk, at Mara, at Elias, and in their stillness he found no power left. Without another word, he turned and shoved his way through the crowd, his boots striking the dust like thunder fading into distance. His shadow left with him, though the memory of it lingered. The square remained hushed for a long moment. Then, slowly, Clara made the innkeeper step forward. Her hands, rough with years, reached for Mara's arm. She did not flinch at the scar. She only touched it lightly, as though blessing it. Looks like strength to me, Clara murmured. Others shifted, murmuring agreement. A man tipped his hat. A mother loosened her hold on her child. Whispers turned softer now, not of fear, but of wonder, of recognition. Mara's chest trembled. She had not wanted their approval. She had long since given up hoping for it. But to stand unhidden, to breathe without the cloth, to see eyes meeting hers without turning away, it was a kind of freedom she had nearly forgotten existed. Beside her, Elias remained quiet. He did not step forward to claim the moment, did not reach for her hand as though to stake a right. He simply stood, steady as ever, his presence a pillar at her side. Mara turned to him, and for the first time, allowed herself to lean. Just a little. Her shoulder touched his, her scar uncovered between them. And in that gentle weight, a promise formed, not of romance alone, but of companionship, of a life where she did not have to carry her fire alone. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon and the town slowly returned to its rhythm, Mara and Elias walked the dirt road back toward her cabin. The air smelled of dust and wood smoke, the prairie wind brushing their faces. She spoke softly, almost to herself. I thought the cloth kept me safe, but it was only a prison. Elias glanced at her, eyes warm beneath the brim of his hat. Sometimes the hardest prison to leave is the one we build for ourselves. Her lips curved, the hint of a smile, small, fragile, but real. And you? She asked. Why did you stay? Why keep coming back? He paused, his voice low. Because you're more than the fire that touched you. And I figured someone ought to remind you of that, till you believed it yourself. Her throat tightened, tears shimmering in her eyes. Not of sorrow this time, but of release. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars appeared, bright against the darkening blue. For the first time in years, the night did not feel heavy. The storyteller's voice softens now, as if leaning closer to the listener by the fire. Friends, we all carry scars. Some are seen, some are hidden, but each one tells a fire we walked through and lived to tell. Do not mistake them for shame. They are proof of your endurance, proof of the strength that still breathes within you. So if you've been hiding, let this be a gentle whisper. You can lay the cloth down. You are more than the wound. You are the one who walked out of the flames. The fire crackles. The night settles. The tale rests. And then, a final call, soft but steady. If this story found a place in your heart, friend, share your thoughts with us. Tell us, from where in this wide world are you watching tonight? And if you wish for more tales of the West, of love, and of truth carried like embers in the dark, then stay close. Subscribe so that you'll be here when the next Firelight story begins.